Hey folks, welcome. It's that time. It's time for another edition of Get to Know Dynatrace. I'm David Jones. I'll be your host today, and we're going to walk you through a demonstration of Dynatrace. But what makes Get to Know Dynatrace so special and so fun and so informative and so valuable is your participation. It's your questions. So, regardless as to whatever medium you are using to watch us on today, if it is YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Twitch, Facebook, whatever it might be, if you're watching us, just go ahead and ask a question inside of the chat window for however you're watching us, and we'll do our best to answer those questions. So, as with all sessions of Get to Know Dynatrace, I like to start off with a couple of segments, and let me start share my screen right now. Here we go. And let's get this started. All right, Get to Know Dynatrace. The first segment is always what's new. And if you're new to Dynatrace, if you're not familiar with Dynatrace, where you want to go to get the latest and greatest on Dynatrace is always going to be the Dynatrace blog. So you just go to www.dynatrace.com/news/blog, and you're going to see all of the new things that are happening here at Dynatrace. And this blog site is not just specific to Dynatrace's platform. It also talks about our industry, the observability industry, the AI industry. There's always going to be great content that's constantly being released onto our blog site. And that could be anything about how we have new capabilities with the Davis AI anomaly detector that's now working on top of our Grail data lakehouse, to questions and blog articles around things like, what's security analytics all about? And how does observability play into that? So I welcome you to come to the blog. It even will always update you with things like, for example, our release notes. Now, Dynatrace is a huge believer in innovation. So much so, we are pushing out new updates to our platform twice a month. Now, if you're running us in our managed capacity, that comes out once a month. But if you're using our SaaS platform, twice a month, you can expect an update. And let me show you what I'm talking about. Here is an example of what one of our release notes, as a matter of fact, one of our latest release notes looks like. And you can see here that we provide product news. For example, telling you about how we have the new capability around auto-adaptive thresholds for driving AI-based quality gating. What do I mean by that? There's a lot that's in that particular sentence. So the idea with Dynatrace is the platform can actually be used as essentially a quality gate. And what do I mean by that? Well, say you have a pipeline and you're moving your project from stage 1 to stage 2 in your pipeline. Well, Dynatrace can exist in between those different stages. And you can now use that AI that we have to allow you to better gauge that, hey, you know what? This build is a good build. Let it through. Or that AI could say, nope, you know what? This bad build, or this build is bad, push it back. And here's the reason why it's bad. That's just one example of the types of things that we release every 2 weeks. Other things like new features, like for example here, the ability for you to visualize and analyze distributions with histogram charts. That's a new capability that we've just pushed out into the platform. And there's always going to be a constant stream, as I mentioned, of innovation that comes from Dynatrace. And keeping up to date on the release notes is one of the ways that you can always be sure that you know about all of the new capabilities that we've been pushing out for you. So let's move on to the next segment. And the next segment is, Did You Know? All right. So for the did you know that navigating in Dynatrace is even easier? So if you've been paying attention, if you've been using Dynatrace for a while, you've probably seen a bunch of updates to the platform. And if you're new to Dynatrace, this is effectively how you can very easily navigate through the platform. The platform itself is incredibly comprehensive. We cover a wide variety of capabilities, and those capabilities could be anything from real user monitoring, synthetic monitoring. It could be being able to generate and then view traces, being able to view logs, being able to consume metrics. There are a whole swath of capabilities inside of the Dynatrace platform. And so for you to get at those capabilities, what we've done is we've created a new launcher. Over on the left-hand side now, this launcher allows you to go in and you can very easily search for what we call an app. All of our capabilities they exist within these apps. It's kind of like if you've ever used one of these things, just like that. If you've used a cell phone, you know that you can just go in there and click on an app and you get certain functionality. Same idea with Dynatrace now. You basically go into the launcher, you can find whatever you're looking for. And even if it's something that you really is of interest to you and you're going to use a lot, you can place it within your dock so that you can just click on it directly the next time that you're into Dynatrace. So navigating around Dynatrace, it's even easier. You have a search capability that allows you to quickly just sort of, find those specific apps that you're looking for and pin it to your dock. And next time you come into Dynatrace, click, there it is. It's that easy. So did you know navigating Dynatrace is even easier? Now you do. All right, folks, those are our first two segments of Get to Know Dynatrace. It's on to the best part of Get to Know Dynatrace. It's demo time. And this week, we have a new guest solution engineer, David Beale. Hey, David, how you doing?
Doing great, Jonesy. How you doing?
You there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
All right. So we're going to hand things over. Oh, we can hear you just fine, David. Okay. Yep. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to hand things over to David, and he's going to run through a demonstration of Dynatrace. But as I mentioned, this is all about audience participation. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in. We'll do our best to answer those questions. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand this over to David. David, the floor is yours.
Awesome. So yeah, as Jonesy said, my name is David Beale. I'm a solutions engineer at Dynatrace based in Chicago, Illinois. He was not joking when he said a new solutions engineer. I've been at Dynatrace for just over 4 months. And, I've been a customer in the past. I was a developer, an SRE, DevOps engineer. So I've gotten to use it, which is a big part of why I'm here and why I love the product. But I am still getting to know it and getting to learn it. So we're going to learn a little bit together. And I'm just going to kind of go through it as I've learned it and as I've been using it and demoing it to other customers and my teammates and such. But yeah, so you really, to start with Dynatrace, you have to start at, in my opinion, Smartscape. And we're going to back up a little bit, but this is just the image I'm going to show you. So Smartscape is a visual representation of basically the PurePath as we see it. So when we deploy our one agents, or we can also use OpenTelemetry, our tracing actually is able to go through your code and see, end to end. everything that is happening in your entire environment. So we put that into this map, which we call the Smartscape. And this is a representation visually of all of the hosts, processes, services, applications running in your environment. And, as I said, as a former customer, as a former engineer, there have been so many times in previous jobs where I've had, a manager, other developers, different stakeholders say, hey, just out of curiosity, how many actual servers do we have? How many actual database servers do we have? How many actual, applications are running, across our environment? Like, what's a number? And there's been so many times where I haven't actually been able to tell them that number without, digging around, doing some grep commands, some kubectl commands, whatever you got to do to answer the question. It's pretty awesome to just be able to go to one screen right off the bat and see this incredible visual representation of everything out there.
Hey, David,
yeah.
let me just take a pause for a second there.
Sure.
And let me start by asking you a question. Mm-hmm. This Smartscape, is this something that you have to configure?
That's a great question. And it absolutely isn't. So digging into that PurePath a little bit more, and forgive me, I'm new, I get excited, and so I start moving a little fast. So, the beautiful thing about Dynatrace, in my opinion, well, one of the many beautiful things is the one agent. We have a single agent. It's binary. It can run on your host in a Kubernetes cluster, essentially anything that can run a binary. And once we install that host, it's going to start doing its thing, tracing your code, figuring out what it connects to, what services are interdependent on each other, where's your database calls, API calls, et cetera. And it's actually going to create this map for you. And, that's just part of the beauty of PurePath, One Agent, and Davis AI.
So, one of the things that I feel like sometimes we're kind of guilty here at Dynatrace is that we throw out a lot of jargon. And so, we use these terms that, like Smartscape, for example. And you did a great job of explaining it's a topology map is what it is.
It
right?
is.
Like that's what it is. But you also threw out another term, and that term is a PurePath. Mm-hmm. So, it's funny, we use this term all the time here at Dynatrace. It comes up. But one of the things that we don't necessarily, it is effectively almost like Dynatrace jargon. And so, folks, if you hear us using, we got someone watching us on a plane. That's awesome. Nice. So, when we use terms like a PurePath, what you can think of it is essentially it's a collection of spans and traces that represent effectively a transaction. And so these are things that, we've been doing, that term PurePath, that dates back to the very beginnings of Dynatrace. And that particular term is because Dynatrace was one of the very first organizations that really started being able to, let people generate these traces across multiple technology types. So, we had a question just pop up right there before we keep going in on this, and that is, can you tell us what are the differences we get using OpenTelemetry over the One Agent? So, OpenTelemetry, let's just take a pause here. For anyone who's new to that term, OpenTelemetry effectively is it is an open sourced mechanism of being able to generate a trace or a span. And this is supported by multiple vendors. As a matter of fact, we are ourselves participating within the OpenTelemetry, standard. We are contributing to the CNCF. This is essentially, again, I'm throwing out a lot of like acronyms and terms that you may not be familiar with, but these are effectively the groups and organizations that are driving, some of these capabilities so that they become standardized. And so OpenTelemetry right now is a CNCF project that we're contributing to. And the difference between OpenTelemetry and what Dynatrace does in terms of generating those traces and spans, there's quite a bit. OpenTelemetry typically involves a little bit more thought process, because as a developer, I have to actually include this in my project. Whereas with the Dynatrace approach, we have this one agent that David was just talking about that automatically goes out and discovers the technology, automatically instruments it, and automatically starts generating those traces. You don't have to put any thought into that whatsoever. The output of this, and one of the great things about working here at Dynatrace, is that we don't particularly care whether or not someone is generating their traces from OpenTelemetry or if they're using our one agent to do this. Both in OpenTelemetry and the one agent is this concept of what we call a trace ID. And that trace ID is just that. Every trace that gets generated has a unique ID associated with it. And the magic of Dynatrace and what you see in this Smartscape is how we stitch all of that together. That's a great question. Thank you very much. David, I apologize. I stepped on your demo and we started answering the questions. How about you pick up and keep going there?
I'd love to. And just to piggyback on the OpenTelemetry question, it's a little near and dear to me. I have a long history with OpenTel, and I think it's truly a better together story. We see a lot of customers that have already invested in OpenTel, and that, they're not going to lose that work if they choose Dynatrace. Like, we can integrate with that, we can integrate with the one agent, and it really is a better together story. But yeah, to continue with my demo, so we talked a little bit about Smartscape. We talked about the PurePath and how it gets there. But once you're actually in Dynatrace, how do you see value from it? And I think that right now, with what we're doing with our Grail AI engine, with our Davis AI engine and with our Grail logging platform, our problems card is really just my favorite place to start. So when you have anomalies detected in your environment and you're able to tune that, like, what are the thresholds, what are the time windows? We have customers in high frequency trading, and they need granular notifications. Do we have seconds of latency? Do we have those time windows are really, really narrow. But essentially, once you define, like, here's a good standard working condition for my services, when we see an issue with that, we're actually going to create what's called a problem card, and we're looking at one right now. So you can see that this was created after multiple application problems on 4 applications. We had one affected service, and you can see here the business impact right off the bat, the affected service calls, and the affected sessions. Now, this is an app that we run locally here at Dynatrace, a test app essentially that is developed here that we can create errors in. It's pretty predictable. We sort of know it. And it's just a good environment for us to be able to dog food our own software. So one of my favorite things here is the root cause analysis. So you're able to see here, it's this easy travel web service. We had 3 service failure rate increase events, and then it's going to give you this visual resolution path. And this is similar to what we saw in the Smartscape, but you can see here that we've got a synthetic monitor and HTTP monitor. They're on a web application, which is hitting this web request service and this web service. So this is actually already healed. I'm using a problem that has already been worked out. But this is what you're going to get once you've installed the one agent, once you've configured Dynatrace, and once Davis has analyzed your environment, gotten to know it, and starting to understand, like, what is a problem, what is normal working condition, how do I actually solve that problem. This gives the developer, the user, whomever, just an incredible starting point at actually resolving the issue. It gives you good historical data for postmortems, for planning velocity, all that sort of stuff. And then it's also just a great single pane of glass. This could be a lot of ServiceNow alerts, a lot of Jira alerts. Instead, you've got this one single ticket. You've got this visual resolution path, and you can split it out any way you want to with the actual alerting. So I'm just a huge fan of this. It's one of my favorite ways to get started. And then go ahead.
Sorry, I got another question for you. So, you mentioned you had a developer background. You've been a developer for over 10 years. In the past, first off, as a developer, how do you know when you had a problem?
Oh man, well, I'm going to show my age here a little bit, and honestly, it was I was getting a call from a boss or a coworker or someone like that customers are seeing things. We're getting emails. We're getting like honestly, the customer usually knew it before we did. Sadly to say.
So so what's kind of like in the past? What were the chain of events? Let's just say you weren't using Dynatrace. What are the chain of events that typically occur when someone says, "Hey, we think there's a problem"?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a real life example. I think coming from a developer background, sometimes my war stories are my superpower. So in 2017, I was in New York. I was working at a startup, and we were building our architecture. We were on AWS. We were very, very bullish on cloud native services. We really didn't want to spin up any storage, anything we didn't have to. If it was cloud native, we could automate it. We could build it with Terraform. That's how we wanted to roll. And I stood in front of a lot of really smart people, and I said that S3 and Amazon would never, ever fail. It could just never go down. It was too distributed. It was a global service. Like one way or another, we'd always have access to it. The next day, S3 went down. So we built a lot of infrastructure, a lot of things around S3. It was our main, persistent storage for the entire application. And it took about, I'm going to say about 2 hours before someone actually was like, I'm just going to check and see if AWS is having an outage. We didn't have the observability. We didn't have the tracing. We didn't have the application monitoring to even see what was happening. And, it was pretty simple. Our storage had gone down. We had no access to most of our persistent data. And it took a long time to figure that out. So, just a lot of trial and error, a lot of war rooms, a lot of angry Zoom calls, a lot of, multiple people doing manual processes to try to figure out what's going on.
So, to me, that sounds expensive. And I have to imagine that, having like, people like your, talent like yourself, and then, having a whole bunch of other people having meetings, constant meetings, trying to recreating the issue is a problem because my lower environment is not the same as my production environment. It just strikes me as being really, really inefficient and really, really expensive. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And, when you start getting into these outages that are customer facing, you're going to have a lot of people more expensive than me on the call. It didn't take long for, a CTO or VP of engineering or someone like that to get on the trail. When there's a customer facing outage, you're losing a lot more than just customers. You're losing, all those minds behind your company, keeping the wheels turning, keeping velocity going, keeping, innovation. So yeah, the expenses are a lot more than just, what's out there and what's being lost at the business level.
So knowing what you know from, the way that you've seen things done in the past, the way that you've seen things done without Dynatrace, now looking at, hey, here's this problem card that's being generated by this AI that's telling me, here's the problem, here's the impact of the problem, here's the people that are potentially affected by the problem, and here's the root cause of that. How does that change things?
And it's a game changer. If you'd asked me this, I don't know, 5 to 7 years ago, sort of at the peak of my DevOps experience, I might have said, man, this is going to work me out of a job. Firefighting is half of what I do. And, I think that now I would see this and be like, this is awesome. I can spend a lot more time building automation, building, robust CI/CD pipelines, building that platform engineering self-service dream and, making my developers happy. So yeah, I just see it as a lot of extra time to do the work that we'd really want to be doing as engineers.
Far out. I'm sorry, David. Again, I sort of stepped on your demo. Back. Where did you want to take us now? What did you want to show us?
You're not stepping on anything, Jonesy. I think conversational demos are my favorite way to roll. If I'm just talking, I feel like I'm doing it wrong. So Yeah, we can dig into this a little bit. Like, right now we're saying we've got 4 affected applications, 1 affected service. Let's dig into this a little bit. So we've got, our Easy Travel web service right here. Now, in a lot of observability platforms and, even in Dynatrace, I could get here by menu diving, going to my applications, going to services. There's a million different ways to get there. But here I've got this problem. I don't care about my other services. I care about Easy Travel service. So I'm going to click into it. And right off the bat, I'm getting some awesome information. And you can see in this upper right, I'm still in my problem card. I'm still in the time frame. I'm still working on this through the lens of a problem card. But now I can see, I'm in the Easy Travel service. I can see my failed requests here. I can see the key requests and endpoints, general topology. I can get into traces, get into events right here. Maybe I want to check the logs. Do I need to go to another logging platform, another window? No, I'm just going to run a log query, and here's my logs. Now, 9 times out of 10, you get a problem card, you've got an issue, you click through the service, you see what's going on here. Oh man, this is bad. Roll back to deploy, boom, we're back in business. What's that, 5-10 minutes? The only manual intervention is just looking at it and knowing that a rollback needs to happen. It happens enough. We've got workflows. We could actually create that rollback for you. So, this is one of my favorite things to do in Dynatrace is just think about how easy it would actually be if I own this application. If I actually needed to do what I used to do on a day-to-day basis in firefight, it would be so much easier.
So David, I'm gonna hit you with a couple of questions here right now.
Please.
So in the past, if you didn't have Dynatrace and you're trying to debug a problem, where would you typically go? What would you typically do?
Well, I will say that my bash scripting ability has declined a little bit since I've used Dynatrace. I forget all the arguments for xargs. I don't know that my awk and sed foo is quite what it used to be. But frankly, I don't miss that. And what I'm trying to say is, I spend a lot of time in a terminal window, stringing together commands, grepping logs, doing kubectl commands, a lot of manual intervention, a lot of tabs, and then, a lot of hunting stuff down, going into AWS, finding an IP address. Where does this go? Where, just a lot of manual process, and you're already panicked because there's an issue. So it doesn't really help when you're having to dig around and try to find stuff.
So let me see if I can reiterate this again.
Yeah.
So now things have changed because with Dynatrace, when there's a problem, whoop, there's a problem card. And you looked at that problem card and you clicked on one button and you're in this view right now. And you have access to your metrics, you have access to your traces, you have access to your logs, all on one screen. And
that is correct.
I didn't have to SSH over to a box. I didn't have to go grep a particular log or any of that. It's all right here.
That's it.
That sounds, I don't know, kind of like it does change the conversation, doesn't it? So David, what happens if you went down to those logs down there?
Sure.
Can we have a look at some of those logs?
Sure. Let's click in.
So what's this one here showing us?
All right. So this is a just an info log from the actual application. So,
yep.
But we're getting a lot of really good good information here. So we can already see the process name there. There's a jar file, so it's a Java application. We can see the host. It's running on an EC2. That's pretty simple. It's in US East 1. And then we're actually seeing the process technology here. So like I said before, we've got a Java application. It's running on Tomcat. Pretty solid information for, just a random info event from one service.
Got it. And if I wanted to see just the errors from this log, is that something I can do?
That is absolutely something you can do. So I'm going to get sorry.
No, you got it.
my auto.
So these are all the things that I can. These are all the things that I can query on, right?
These are all the things that we can query on. And again, I'm pretty new here, so I'm still learning the nuances here under pressure. So bear with me. Jonesy, can you give me a hint here? I'm struggling a little bit under pressure.
No. Listen, no worries. Actually, what you can do here is, you see that little call out in the upper right hand side of that screen?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, right there. Let's just go to logs.
Much better. Simple mode. Okay.
There we go. Actually, let's, you know what? Instead of that, let's do this. See that first log there? Let's just open that one up.
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. So now we've got access to not just that particular log, but we have access to all of these different infrastructure components, right? And because they're blue, that means that Dynatrace has automatically decorated them with a link to that. So if I needed to actually go to a particular host or a particular service or process, all you have to do is just click on that and it's going to take me there.
Let's click through to one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's check out the host here. So this is in, I can just see by the naming convention, it's going to be a GKE host. And something I like to remind myself of here is I'm still in the problem card. I can still click back there at any time and just get back right to that initial problem layout, which is great when you're kind of diving in a platform this deep.
Absolutely. And so in this particular view, you can see here that not only are we showing things like all of these metrics, but we can also see now for this particular machine and this particular problem that there's a number of affected SLOs. So an SLO being that service level objective, right? So if I put those SLOs in place and I'm starting to blow through my SLOs, I'm going to see exactly, when that's occurring and what entities are associated with that.
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and click through it? So we've got SLOs here on CPU, disk, memory, and then the optimization of each of those.
So David, you're a developer. Have you used SLOs in the past?
I have, and I think they can be really, really crucial, especially when they're implemented correctly. I think the first step is your SLIs, your service level initiatives, and you need those to keep the SLOs honest. But when you've got buy-in and you've got that SRE culture, it definitely makes for a lot more stability and just a lot more direct communication. It's almost more of a cultural thing than it is a technical thing, I think.
Got it. So, hey, listen, David, I know we were talking that you've done a lot in Kubernetes. Is there anything you want to show us related to that?
I'd love to. So I'm sure that in a previous edition of this, you probably have talked about the new Kubernetes app. I'm a huge fan of it. I love the view of it. I love having all my clusters right here. You can see we've got a couple. We've got one in EKS, we've got one in GKE. Let's go ahead and click into the EKS one. And I've talked a little bit about my kubectl commands, grep commands, like my bash, all that sort of stuff. Here's another instance of Dynatrace, maybe making you lose a little bit of that muscle memory because you're not going to need to do it quite as much. This is a pretty good bird's eye view of a cluster. You can see off the bat, we've got 4 nodes, 13 namespaces. We've got a total of 66 workloads. And that's just on the main screen. If we actually drill in a little bit more, we can see the info, utilization, and then we can get into the logs here too. You just run a query, and boom. And
there it is.
Yeah. a lot of ways to get to different, or a lot of different ways to get to the same place, which I really, really like. You're never that far away from where you want to get in our platform, and the more that I dig into it, the more I'm finding that. This is super helpful. This is something that I find I wish that I could just get in a simple kubectl command, an actual view of the events. And then again, you can see whatever problems are associated with this cluster. Right now, we don't have any. Click into the namespaces here and actually see them all. You see we have 13. This is that Easy Trade app that we were talking about before, the namespace for it. So if I click in, you can see that I have 18 workloads here. And I can click into those. And here's all those workloads. Broker service is one that we have fun with a little bit. It's kind of one of the ways that we break the app and try out the problem cards and such. So you can see here, I've got a Kubernetes workload. There's my CPU memory. I've got one pod, and that's how many I desire. Yeah, you're the only problem that you're going to have with our Kubernetes app and Dynatrace is trying to remember all those kubectl commands that you don't have to use anymore. And you might miss that beautiful, K9's view in your terminal, but I don't think you will.
I wouldn't necessarily call that a problem.
I wouldn't either. It definitely wouldn't show up as a problem card in Dynatrace.
So let me tell you. Let me ask you this: you've used Kubernetes for a while. You're navigating through here. All of this, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, this all makes sense, right?
I think so. I think it's going to make a lot more sense than any other, Kubernetes management console I've ever seen.
And so, for someone who's managing managing a Kubernetes-based app, they've got, their virtual infrastructure. In this particular case, does it matter if they're running it on, if they're running it within their own data center, or if they're, running it based upon some cloud deployment? Does that make a difference here at all?
It doesn't, and that actually is a great jumping off point for how you actually configure Dynatrace on a Kubernetes cluster. And so if you see at the top, it says Add Cluster. I went ahead and clicked that. So we do have streamlined configuration processes for popular Kubernetes distributions. You can see, EKS, GKE there, a lot of AKS lately. Rancher Kubernetes, I have one customer using that. And then other distributions, obviously. So, we don't care what kind of Kubernetes you're using, what you're running it on. It could be EKS, it could be 25 Raspberry Pis strapped together in your closet. If it can take a Helm command, then we can deploy Kubernetes on it. But you see,
David, I don't know, David, that sounded really specific about having the 25 Raspberry Pis, sort of all hooked together in your closet. That don't have any experience in that, do we?
I'm from the South. Originally, I live in Chicago now, but I am prone to a little hyperbole. My wife would definitely agree with that sentiment. But knowing what I know about Kubernetes, and maybe I need to talk to my manager and see if I can expense 25 Raspberry Pis to prove this. But, I have a closet. I'm ready to put it together and put it to the test.
All right.
But yeah, so, again, pretty new at Dynatrace, but I've successfully installed our Dynatrace operator on several Kubernetes clusters at this point. And it does install as an operator. It's a native Kubernetes application. It leverages the Kubernetes API and injects itself into pods. It's a pretty sophisticated agent, on anything. But as someone who, is pretty experienced and pretty familiar with Kubernetes, I've never experienced being able to get up and running with observability quite as quickly as I have with the one agent.
That's fabulous. That's fabulous.
Yeah.
All right, David, we've got 20 minutes left, and let me just take a pause there. So folks, if you're, again, wherever you are, I hear some of you are flying around on airplanes watching us. If you're watching us on LinkedIn, or if you're watching us on YouTube, whatever it might be, please feel free to ask questions. we are more than happy to answer any of those questions. In the interim, while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, David, is there anything else that you wanted to sort of walk us through and show us?
Sure. I'm a big fan of these notebooks. As a developer, notebooks are very, very powerful. It sort of feels like an IDE or like a Jupyter notebook if you've ever used Python. And so what's really cool about these is you can just actually create a new section. I use these query Grails a lot. Grail is our, just to refresh on it, it's our source of data. So it combines all the qualities of a data lake and a data warehouse, and it's just a low cost, fast way to store all of your data associated with your application, your logs, metrics, all that sort of stuff. So I can query that directly here. And I've got a little copy and paste here that I'm going to take. You can actually put markdown here too, so you can write notes in line. And then I can just run this bad boy right here. And I'm fetching logs, but I'm only displaying the timestamp, content, and log level. And you can see I'm doing this with DQL, which is our query language. And I'm just actually fetching them. I'm filtering and saying it matches value, log level error. Now, I couldn't do that in the GUI just now because I forgot the actual code for it. It was status. I remembered it after we started talking about it. But you can see here that I'm able to do that error log level here with DQL. And then I'm just taking out the fields, timestamp, content, and log level. If I were a developer using Dynatrace, I would probably have a notebook for every service that I worked on. And that way I could just come here, I could query, I could filter, I could, especially a lot of developers now, they're deploying a lot. They're going in, they're moving fast, they're deploying often, they're living the CI/CD dream. So they have things live in staging, live in lower environments that they can kind of go in and play with and break and see how it interacts with other services and all that sort of stuff. And if I were a developer, I'd have a notebook for each one of those services that I could just live query data, see what's going on kind of as I'm working. I'd say that notebooks are probably the thing that I find the most useful day to day with Dynatrace.
It's fascinating now that you can not only query the logs in this fashion, but there's so many other things that you can query as well. And that's because of the unique storage mechanism that we're using on our platform. And that's our data lakehouse. Did you want to take a moment to talk about that, or do you want me to take a stab at it?
I mean, I touched on it a little bit before, and I think what's awesome about Grail is, like I said, it sort of combines the best qualities of a data lake and a data warehouse, and that's the lake house. But I'd love to hear your take on it too.
Well, so the idea, folks, is that in the past, the Dynatrace platform, we actually, for different types of data, we were using different types of storage approaches. For example, for time series, our platform before, we would use things like Cassandra. For our, for that trace information, that PurePath information, we would index it with, say, something like an Elastic. And ultimately, what we realized was that moving forward, having different storage mechanisms really hindered our ability to be able to create a query there. I might want to query across my different data types. And remember, observability is about metrics, traces, and logs. And so we said, hey, this is a challenge. This is a problem. If we're running into it, we know everyone else is going to eventually run into this as well. And hence why we created our own sort of data lakehouse. And what that allows us to do is now this DQL, this query language that David just mentioned, I can use the same query language to query not only my logs, but I can query my traces, I can query my metrics, I can query the topology, I can query for system events within the platform. Eventually, you'll be able to query your user sessions, your user actions. All of that is queried in the exact same fashion, which makes it much easier for us to be able to ask very complicated questions of the data and get very interesting answers. David, have you ever played around with the business events?
I have a little bit. You know, it was honestly part of my my interview process was playing around with business events a little bit. I think they're incredibly useful. You
Oh,
want to
okay.
get into
Hold on.
those a little bit?
We got a question here before we go in and talk about the business events. So this at my old job, we traced and saved Dynatrace PurePaths on transactions. We failed to trace transactions that, for whatever reason, took longer than 5 minutes to complete, and those are the ones that were really interesting in getting deep into. So here's part of the challenge, folks. Is, here at Dynatrace, we honestly have to run a balance in terms of being able to provide, that depth of visibility, but we have to be able to do it across, honestly, in many cases, some fairly substantial deployments. And, in certain scenarios, there's been rules that typically are out of the box put in place to prevent, types of activity that could hamper performance. And in those types of scenarios, we're typically well aware of when they occur. If they become problematic, if they become an issue, typically what we recommend to our customers is reach out to us. There may be some tweaking that we can do on our side, to overcome whatever that might be. We can't do it all the time, and we just, there are certain limitations that we just, certainly can't get around. But what I can tell you is that the new data lakehouse, this that we have under the platform moving forward, the instance of those types of restrictions that we've used in the past are far fewer, because we have a lot more capability now to be able to do things, because we're not reliant on those, traditional storage, technologies like Cassandra, or those, those older indexing technologies like Elastic. That just simply, gave us no choice to put on these restrictions. So now with the new approach, we've got, some much better options. But that's a great question, and thanks for asking that. Sorry, David, I cut you off. We were talking about business events.
We were talking about business events. Yeah, let's click through that for a second. And just to piggyback on that data lake discussion, I think that it's truly a testament to our investment in AI. Without Davis AI and everything that we put into it, I don't think Grail could have ever happened. And I know it couldn't have happened. That's just a testament to the fact that we're early adopters. We've been doing AI for a lot longer than most companies out there.
That's very true. And folks, if you're new to Dynatrace, what David mentioned, we've been using practical examples of AI, using very different models than the types of things that people are talking about today. Those, large language models, those chat GPTs, open AIs. We took originally a very different approach to AI that was much more based upon causality and deterministic results. And the outcome of that was the AI was very practical, worked out of the box, didn't have to sit there and train the model. And if your training failed, have to start from scratch, didn't have to do any of that. We are looking at using large language models and those sort of, GPT type approaches for the way that you will interact with Dynatrace in the future. But those causal components to our AI, they will be there for a long time to come, because they just work. All right, so what do we got here? What are we showing us right now, David?
Yeah, so this is how business events are configured, and I think a lot of people are going to configure them from within one agent. We can also configure them with RUM, real user monitoring, and then we're able to do third-party applications with the RESTful API. I don't know how would you want to take this? I think maybe we could kind of look at one agent and see how some of them are configured here in this environment.
Well, yeah. So rather than going into the configuration, let's actually go back to the doc and let's do a search for is it the business analytics piece? I think it is.
Yeah.
Business flow. Sorry, you had it.
Flow. There we go.
So here's a good example. Yeah, let's see the biz events, the platform business events right there down. Yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
That's the one. There we go. So this, folks, is an example of, again, now that with the new platform, with our new storage mechanisms, this is an example of the types of things that we can do with that observability information. So in the past, we would have been, and this gets back to actually to the question that was we just recently answered, okay, about the challenge with a PurePath, capturing a PurePath that had taken a long period of time. In the past, we were challenged with that type of stuff, again, as I was saying, because of the limitations that things like Cassandra and Elastic put on us. But now in the future, we can do a lot more interesting things. This is an example of that. A business event is effectively, it's an abstraction that we can pull out of any payload. So and what I mean by that is anytime that you see a request being made and there's a response, there's typically payloads that are being passed back and forth. We can now pull out pieces of those payloads and we can store them in that data lakehouse as a business event. And what this allows us to do are some really interesting things. So that if my transaction is passing over a product order, I could pull out details around that order. I could know what's being ordered, how much it cost, that the order was successful. And all of that information can be stored as a business event inside of our platform. And this data is being captured at near real time. So this is not the data science team going off and doing something, really creative using, say, like a Snowflake or, something like a Databricks or something like that. This data is being captured near real time inside of Dynatrace. You could then wrap an SLO around it and use it to drive and trigger workflow events. So this expands what observability allows us to do. And I have to say, it's probably one of the most exciting things that we've been doing lately here with the platform are these business events, because they are just tied to those real world transactions. And it's not just about, is my CPU hot, or am I using up too much memory, or any of that. Now I can sit there and see if that type of activity is occurring. This is how it's impacting whatever it is that my application is trying to do. It's impacting the amount of orders that we are able to transact. These are all different things that we can start tying together. And I just think it's super exciting. So thanks for walking us over there on that, David. David, we've got like 5 minutes left. Any last minute things that you wanted to sort of walk us through?
Let me think. We've covered a lot. We've moved quick.
We did.
We've covered a lot. I definitely agree with you on business events. I worked in e-commerce for a long time, and I think that just knowing that sort of transactional flow of shopping carts and abandoned carts and things like that. I think business events can be one of the most powerful tools for any e-commerce company. I'm trying to think of some of my favorite things. Honestly, one of my favorite things is this Davis Copilot, and this is another way that we are really leveraging AI, is just being able to take these human language and turn it into a solution. So let's.
Oh, wait, you got me excited now, David. Actually, before you go in and show the example here, let's go into the notebooks again.
Okay.
And in the notebooks, there should be some, if you go to open some, actually just go up, up, up to your left. You're going to open.
Copilot, yeah. So let's see.
There's actually a note. There's a predefined notebook that has a bunch of great examples.
Oh yeah, let's check it out.
Yeah, just go check this out here. Should be one that says Copilot examples. This is
the demo environment. It might not be shared with me.
How about how about I share my screen? So I'm going to share my screen right now, folks, so as we can just show this. And here we go. So if we go into the notebooks here, and Copilot examples, there we go. So what do we mean by Copilot? Copilot is our approach to using generative AI to effectively democratize access to Dynatrace. We walked through a whole bunch of things with you today. We walked through examples where we were using things like our Dynatrace query language to, powerfully pull in information together. Where we see Dynatrace Copilot is I'll be able to ask a natural language question, and Dynatrace will then, the Copilot will generate the query that will give you that result. And so here you can see all sorts of examples like show me all the error logs this week within 15-minute intervals. Or I could say, show me the count of error logs grouped by the K8's namespace within a 5-minute interval. Or even down here, I could say, find the problems in last week and show me the 10 most common root cause entities. So these are all different things that we can now basically just ask a natural language question of, and Dynatrace is going to be able to use this Copilot to automatically generate here what the DQL to get that result. Like, for example, this one, show me the sum of the amount of all of the business events for this particular event here in 1 hour intervals and call the output deposits over the last week. Well, there you go. So now I'm basically tracking how much money is being deposited through that particular business transaction. That's a super powerful thing to be able to pull in near real time. And all I have to do is just ask it this question, and it just automatically generates the DQL for that. All right. So, folks, listen, it's coming near the top of the hour. David, I really appreciate you taking the time to walk. Oh, wait. Is there, could you please clarify if there is a charge for any kind of technical support from a Dynatrace representative? That's an interesting question, and it actually does vary, right? Depending upon what level of support we're talking about. As an example, we have velocity consultants. Velocity consultants are Dynatrace employees that help our customers accelerate their journey with Dynatrace. And typically there is a fee associated with that type of service. But if you go into things like, for example, Dynatrace University, most of that content is available free of charge. There might be a small fee if you're going to write a certification exam. Here's someone actually saying that they have D1P, which is our support program, and they love it. So it really does depend on what component of support you're talking about and asking about. But that's a great last-minute question. That was a great last-minute question. Thank you for that. Just as we are going to sign off, we get a couple of questions. This is always great. But David, thank you very much for your time and walking us through that demo. That was great. We spent a lot of great time on Kubernetes, which was something that's always of interest to folks. Any parting comments, David?
No. Thanks a lot for having me. It was fun kind of walking through the platform, and with any good conversation, I learned a lot. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you again, David, very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for your questions and attending. It's been our pleasure to do this. Again, what makes Get to Know Dynatrace so special is your participation. We really appreciate your questions. And with that, if you are new to Dynatrace and want to take it out for a spin, go to dynatrace.com /free trial, and you can take it out for a spin. Other than that, folks, we'll see you next time on the next edition of Get to Know Dynatrace.